This week, Memorial Day got us thinking. Some of the biggest issues facing our country today are forgotten once the cameras switch off, but our ADD news cycle only makes us more vulnerable to repeat disasters like, for example, the Flint Michigan Water Crisis. So let's revisit Flint, not only for the sake of water, but for the sake of the bigger picture, of how our system let this happen, even pushed for it to happen, in Flint and elsewhere. Next up, access to fresh water is becoming more and more dire, and Nestle wants to make sure that your thirst doesn't get in the way of their profits. And finally, a memorial look at the TPP, the People's Impact Report, and what's next. But first, strike the flint. Strike the flint and watch it burn. The water just more fodder for the poor man's pyre. Sadistic, capitalistic drowning in this fire, lead-strapped bodies, sacrificial lives to pay the sick empire. Yes, we can bomb more foreign lands, but funds dry up when sick kids come with empty cups. Water, please, some water. Shuffle this democracy, sprinkle some hypocrisy, blend with cups of tyranny that runneth over. Are you thirsty? Call it an emergency, manage this with urgency, make the switch, no care, full throttle. Bartender, let me get a bottle. Hear the tap is nasty, so let's just trust the shills at Nestle who say this thirst is worth the hurt. No right to water, fuck, who's worse? Drink up, this Kool-Aid blend will make amends. We're on your side, cross our hearts, hope you die. The desperate poor here once more to slide in this riptide. A shrugging homicide. I don't recall. You see, it's all hazy. I don't know. I might have done, but blame's not mine. What I did is not a crime. Because you see, in this system, we the people under greed's gold steeple are easily dispensable. But wait, you say, incomprehensible, so indefensible, yet here we sit and watch them strike the flint, and then it burns, spurned by those who in the smoke and mirrors pose as guardians of change and hope, tell us to shut up and cope, that anger will just sink the boat, that we're all in, don't rock the boat. If you're so angry, go and vote. The system works and we should know. We fixed it just to make it so. And so they prattle on. Calls for justice rattle like little bits of leaden pipes echoing a thirsty plight. I will not think that they will save us. I rather think that they would lead the Lady Justice blind to where this greed was mined, strike a flint and watch her burn. It's what they do. It's what they've done. We see it on repeat, but have we ever learned? We yearn for justice, thirst for change, hold out cups and hope it rains, but nothing trickles down this way. The only thing that we have gained is poison and a lot of pain. The water here, likewise there, continuously stained, with tide-like repetition framed, by greed, corruption, over and the same. Do not look up and hope that you'll be saved. Look side to side. The 99, we will not be slaves. To 1%ers, we dissenters know their twisted game, and will not play. Like a wave, we must flood, so when they strike the flint to burn, we will drown them out. Corruption overturned. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. This weekend is Memorial Day, and outside of the typical question I always ask myself, why we have so many memorials glorifying war and so few to absolutely anything else. Aside from that, I got to thinking about this idea of remembering, which today's news cycles, even if you do get some real reporting on an issue, which is rare, it's hard to hang on to it for more than a day or two. But just because cameras vanish doesn't mean that the issues do. Quite the opposite, they continue to grow, become more complex, more corruption gets shoved around behind closed doors, under rugs, and under the radar. So in this spirit of remembering, and the connection of past to present, let's dig into our first story. Flint. You may have picked up that today's spoken word was inspired by Flint, Michigan's water crisis, and indeed, the system that allowed not only Flint to happen, but many other places. In reality, it's pretty fucking surprising that we don't have more Flints popping up in this unabashed corporatocracy that puts profit before people at every turn. particularly when you consider the absolute power that an emergency manager, like Darnell Early in Flint's case, has over decisions like where 100,000 people get their water from. Reminder, Early, appointed by Governor Rick Snyder with no public input, is the one who greenlighted the switch to the corrosive Flint River. And while Early is the villain in Flint's story, Snyder alone has appointed emergency managers to 7 cities and school districts during his term as governor of Michigan. And, surprise, surprise, these emergency managers are appointed in cities and school districts that are low income and primarily black. Why? Well, for that absolute power, answerable to no one but the governor who appoints them. Pretty sweet deal for Snyder. According to a law passed in 2011 by Governor Rick Snyder, which broadened the scope of influence for emergency managers, these anti-democratic, sociopathic little shitsticks have the power to, quote, cancel or renegotiate city contracts, liquidate assets, suspend local government, unilaterally draft policy, and even disincorporate. Trivia point here, emergency managers in Michigan have employed all of these tools of ultimate power except disincorporation. Maybe they just didn't have time to get around to it, because what fun is power if you can't use and abuse it, right? So this is how you get Flint, where water is not only filled with lead, but also with hazardous chemicals like, wait for it, chloroform. So not only should you not drink or bathe or wash with this water, you probably shouldn't breathe around it either. No big deal. And in spite all of this, Flint residents still pay the highest water rates in the country, almost 2 times the national average, in fact. Meanwhile, data from 2009 to 2013 shows that almost half of Flint's residents lived below the poverty line, with a quarter, that's 25% of residents, making below $15,000 a year. And let's just say, for devil's advocate, that we consider the median household income in Flint as reported by the census, namely $24,679. That's still less than half of the national average income between 2009 and 2013, which was about $53,000. Add to the fact that Career Trends estimates the average cost of living for a single person with no kids to be more than $28,000 a year, not considering the most expensive water in the country. Yeah, that paints a pretty fucking shitty picture for the residents of Flint. And I know. I'm sorry I'm throwing a lot of graphs and numbers your way, particularly for someone like me who really does not like math. But these numbers not only give you a small factual tidbit of how our system is rigged against the most vulnerable, but it also shows in plain black and white math how it's quite literally impossible to get by in a city like Flint, now wrestling with the added costs of healthcare due to any one or a combination of the following. In children, brain development, seizures, coma, and even death. Anemia, hypertension, renal impairment, immunotoxicity, and toxicity to the reproductive organs. The neurological and behavioral effects of lead are believed to be irreversible. Furthermore, lead is a cumulative toxicant, meaning that it builds up in your body and then stored in places like your brain, your liver, your teeth, kidneys, and bones, meaning that even if Flint's water were to be cleaned up today, the long-term catastrophic effects of the lead poisoning would still be felt for decades to come. And lead is more toxic for children than adults, but it's certainly no fucking picnic for adults either. The CDC reports that adults who experience lead exposure can suffer from anything from abdominal pain to prolonged depression, memory loss, high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney disease, and reduced fertility. Not to mention, on that same note, that any pregnant mothers will of course pass on the lead to their unborn children, resulting in anything from the aforementioned ailments to mental retardation and physical handicaps at birth. And remember, these are just the effects of lead on the body. The effects of the other chemicals found in Flint's water obviously don't do anything to mitigate these negative effects. So take all this data in, hold it in there, and now multiply it, because Flint is not alone. Lead pipes crisscross this land of the free, home of the brave, and indeed, here in D.C., in 2001, lead leached into the water supply due to old lead pipes, and a partial pipe replacement plan only exacerbated the problem. But hey, at least city officials here knew where the fuck to find them. In cities across the US, records are severely lacking as to where the lead pipes even are. So understand, I'm not telling you this to scare you, but so that you know the facts, so that you know that Flint is not the anomaly that the corporate media or government officials would have you believe. Flint is but one example of a nationwide failing, or indeed missing, infrastructure. And as infrastructure bills stall in our oh-so-effective Congress, the excuse is always, well, where are we going to get the money for all these projects? I'll ask you to keep that in mind, as well as the $1.5 trillion that we spent on this piece of shit that doesn't even fly properly. And keep that in mind as I relay this information. In April of this year, the Fitch Ratings Agency estimated the cost of replacement of lead pipelines to be between $1,000 and $5,000 per line, a figure that could add up to $50 billion nationally for replacing the estimated 6 to 11 million U.S. lead lines. Based on that estimate, replacing Michigan lines could cost between $500 million and $2.3 billion. So that's a lot, right? Not more than $1.5 trillion for a hunk of essentially scrap metal, but still, it's a lot. But riddle me this. Strap in, because here comes some more numbers. The White House press office released a report in early May of this year outlining the funds that are going to Flint to assist in the current crisis. Here are some of them. $80 million in January promised by Obama to increase access to potable water and help unfuck the current system. $250,000 for more medical staff and services, a one-time Department of Health and Human Services emergency funding of $3.6 million. $15 million from the U.S. Department of Labor for humanitarian and recovery efforts, and $400,000 from the Small Business Association to try and boost the economy in this area. And these numbers do not include the cost of promised furthered water testing, sampling, and on-the-ground aid supposedly from agencies such as FEMA, EPA, USDA, and HUD. Although on that last point, residents and visitors alike report that community volunteers are the ones distributing water, checking the filters, public health, and safety, not federal agencies. But that little hiccup aside, if we were to add all those numbers up, we would undoubtedly be left with a considerable sum. And if you think about it, a totally unnecessary sum, had we prevented the Flint water crisis from happening, which we could have. The one-time fee of replacing lead pipes is far and away smaller than seeing crises like Flint pop up all over the U.S. in the coming years, not to mention the aforementioned long-term healthcare costs. What will those add up to? Or how about countless years of pain and suffering? What is that worth? Is it worth less than bombing children in Yemen? Is it worth less than aid to tyrannical states like Saudi Arabia and Israel? Is it worth less than oil and gas subsidies, pharmaceutical kickbacks, and Wall Street loopholes? Which is why I'm bringing this up now. Because as I said earlier, these issues don't vanish just because the cameras do. We can't all focus on Flint 24/7, obviously, but we can remind ourselves of the realities of life in this exceptional country. Furthermore, we can and must act. This Memorial Day weekend, a coalition of organizations are putting together a multi-state water convoy to deliver fresh water to Flint. In conjunction with that, there will also be a town hall meeting/press conference to apply the pressure needed to get this community the answers, actions, and justice that they deserve. The water distribution will take place on Saturday and the town hall on Sunday. All related officials to this deadly fiasco will be invited and urged to attend. The case will be presented to them as the public sees it and as documents have proven. Citizens directly affected will have a chance to speak the truth to the media as to what is really taking place in their city. We will then move forward with direct requests to specific actions that need to take place to find remedy for those suffering people. Following the press conference, the community will be invited to attend a March of Solidarity. So to find out more and where to drop off water in your area, or indeed to set up your own water drop-off point, visit the Facebook event page at bit.ly/FlintDrop. So, next up, let me give you another heads up on a low-life scum that we've covered before but need to remember and bring up again.
You low-life scum.
Oh, Nestle. Nestle. Back in episode 7, we named Nestle the lowlife scum of the week, but it's not as if they couldn't have gotten that award consecutively ever since episode 7. In the interest of catching up, let's see what they've been up to lately. Oh, last week, they gained control over the town of Freiburg, Maine's groundwater for the next 25 years, with a possible extension to 45. This is a tale of blatant corruption, corporate power, and government complicity, starting with all 3 of the main public utilities commissioners tasked with approving or rejecting the deal being ousted before for direct ties to Nestle, only to be replaced by 3 more corporatist goons directly appointed by his lowlife scumness and early Trump supporter Governor LePage. The deal was then upheld by Maine's Supreme Judicial Court last week, essentially blocking activists from seeking government oversight in this ludicrous raping of people and planet. Add to this what residents called Orwellian backlashes against those who publicly spoke out against the deal, including losing their jobs and receiving personal threats. Stay classy, Nestle. And if you're wondering, how the hell did this even happen? If a city owns its water rights, how can Nestle just swoop in and negotiate a deal without the city and the people say so? Yes, good point. Well, in the case of Freiburg, it was rather simple because their water had been privatized. As Nikki Sequeira, the co-founder of Community Water Justice in Freiburg, said, "Our local municipal water supplier for Freiburg, Maine, is run by a private company. So it's not run by a municipality. They can engage in contracts with corporations such as Nestle much easier. It benefits their shareholders and Nestle because it's not publicly run and managed, which helps them get what they want." In other words, the people who lived in Freiburg had absolutely no say in what happened to their water. It was up to a private company to decide, and that private company decided Nestle was good for them and their wallets. And that's just where it begins and ends. It's where it begins and ends in any of these cases, because it's not about human rights. It's actually not even about water. It's about money. Just like Flint. Just like Porter Ranch. Just like the Gulf of Mexico, Detroit, New Orleans, you name it. It's about money. And when shit goes down, it's not the corporations that are held accountable, it's you and me. It's our tax dollars that clean up oil. It's our 9-to-5s that bail out Wall Street, our scraping and saving that pay for Nestle CEOs' mansions. It's our time, our overtime, our 52 weeks straight of work that pay for them to poison us. We are literally paying to be poisoned. We are literally paying to have less access to fresh water, fresh food, and fresh air. And as the sickening, nauseating reality of that sets in, let me just try to mitigate your gag reflex by giving you a little bit of good news. Last week in Oregon, Hood River County voters blocked Nestle's plan to bottle water in their community, passing the nation's first ever initiative to prevent water bottling plants. Fuck yeah. And opponents of the bottling plant told press that they hoped that their initiative would, quote, set a precedent for other communities battling bottled water extraction, including communities in California, Maine, and Montana. Yeah, that needs to happen. And for that to happen, it'll require people like you and me working on it. So here is a place that you can go to get started. Food and Water Watch is a bastion of facts, activism, and inspiration in the fight for accessible, clean, and fresh food and water. Head over to their site at foodandwaterwatch.org and get started by clicking on one of those issue boxes. Now, moving on to our final segment today, let's take a look at something that even further ties these issues of food, water, economy, healthcare, and corruption together in one sickening package for the corporate elite, namely the TPP.
You low-life scum.
Now I know I'm double dipping on the Low Life Scum Award, but considering it's a holiday weekend, I figure we could splurge a little bit. So the TPP, yet another piece of corporate shit that we've covered many times on this show, indeed since our very first few episodes. And if you recall from just a couple of weeks ago, I discussed the importance of the upcoming lame duck session, as supporters look to an even more corrupt and transitory Congress, and an even more distracted and apathetic populace to push this corporate coup through. Well, last week, the U.S. International Trade Commission gave their thumbs up for the TPP's passage by releasing their Economic Impact Report, which, to absolutely no one's surprise, touted the great benefits of the TPP, much like they had done for NAFTA and the more recent Korea Free Trade Agreement. Now, you may not be on the up and up when it comes to trade deals with Korea, not a lot of people are, but you might remember the havoc that was wreaked on our own country by NAFTA. Hundreds of thousands of jobs lost, wages in free fall, the exploitation of workers, and environmental destruction, to name a few. So, why is the USITC doubling down on their shitty trade deal track record? Well, so glad that you asked, because believe it or not, it's because they're corrupt as fuck. Of the 6 commissioners at the USITC tasked with releasing the impact statement on TPP, not one of them is clear of gross conflicts of interest, whether that be a former lobbyist for international development or one of the dipshits who actually pushed for NAFTA's passage in the first place. As James Hoffa, president of the Teamsters, bluntly and accurately put it, the numbers coming out of the U.S. International Trade Commission about the economic benefits that it says would result from the implementation of this 12-nation Pacific Rim trade deal are typical, and typically wrong. For years now, the USITC has reported on pending trade agreements and made them look like blockbuster deals for this nation. But everyday Americans know the true story. Millions of jobs have been lost in the past 2 decades, and wages have been cut for many formerly middle-class workers across the country. More than a few are now struggling to make ends meet. This country should not engage in a race to the bottom. But despite the claims of the USITC, that is exactly what will happen if Congress moves ahead and ratifies this very bad trade agreement. And that is why, not only is Flush the TPP ramping up their push to fight this very bad trade agreement, they put together their very own People's Economic Impact Statement for the TPP. But unlike the USITC, they use things like history and facts, rather than fanciful fictions of the bought and sold, in order to compile this report. Now, I strongly recommend that you take a deeper look at their research, which you can find on their website. However, for our purposes now, here are a few of the basic bullet points. A decrease in the GDP by 0.54% over 10 years, an ironic blow to the trade deficit, further damage to domestic manufacturing in several sectors from automotive to dairy, a net loss of 448,000 jobs by 2025, a global race to the bottom in wages, a decrease in income for most workers with a simultaneous increase in wages for the top 10%, a rise in healthcare costs, a surge in fossil fuel extraction primarily via fracking and drilling, the deregulation of financial institutions, and a privatization of public services, kind of like Freiburg, Maine. Yeah, look forward to much more of that. As Flush the TPP concludes in their impact statement, reject ratification and remake trade. It does not serve the interests of the overall economy, but serves only the interests of transnational corporations and oligarchs in the participating countries. The purpose of trade should not be to enrich the 0.1% who profit from the success of multinational corporations. Instead, trade agreements should help all people, raise the standard of living, provide safer products, and ensure that workers have, at a minimum, a living wage and a safe work environment. Trade agreements must also confront such global problems as the destruction of oceans and forests, mass extinction, and climate change. The era of secret trade negotiations must be ended. To read the full report and to get involved in your area to fight the TPP and corporatocracy, visit flushthetpp.org. And as a final wrap-up, and so we can all get a break from me for a minute, here is a slideshow of some of the anti-TPP protests from the more distant to the more recent past. A nice little memorial bookend to ignite and inspire. Well, revolutionaries, that does it for this week's episode. Just a quick heads up: this weekend, I will be the keynote speaker at the 26th annual Heartwood Forest Council meeting outside Athens, Ohio. Heartwood is an organization focused on education, advocacy, and citizen empowerment, with a focus on environmental justice. If you're in or around that area and would like to attend, please visit heartwood.org for more info. And besides that, please do spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Check out the last slide to see all the sites that I mentioned in today's show, and for more activist news from the front lines, be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the rainy Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.